So we are rolling. So Jack, you may begin whenever you're ready.
We are interviewing Nancy Hopkinson. And I think we'll have Nancy start off by telling us where she's from and how she came to be here with us.
Well, I was born in Philadelphia in 1941 and lived there until I went off to college, came back there, taught in Philadelphia school system for off and on 6 years because I had 2 babies in between. And then we moved to Northern Virginia in the Washington, D.C. area. My husband was assigned by the Boy Scouts of America to the National Capital Area Council, and then we moved over to Montgomery County, Maryland, which I was brought up Lutheran, but there was a Baptist church, an Episcopal church, a Presbyterian church, a Methodist church, and the Lutheran church was a half an hour away, so there was the Episcopal church. Nearest thing we had to a liturgical church, and we joined. The kids were all confirmed at the National Cathedral, and I taught at the school there for 25 years and was on the vestry at St. Peter's Episcopal Church, and we have a few other members here, the Ross and Joe Waring and a few others that belong to that same church, and moved down here and was looking for an Episcopal church, and I wasn't here full time in '96. I was here part of the time, and then I went to a few churches, and I came to Holy Cross and was comfortable here. And we were here one day, and I'm not going to disparage any other churches, but I just felt more comfortable here. And my daughter looked at me and she said, "You know, Mother, this church needs you more than you need it."
Oh, yeah.
And so I said, okay. And at that point, we were in the chapel. And
Was Tony Campbell
there was a little black priest, and then Michael, can't remember Michael's last name, he was an Englishman.
We can look it up.
And he came, but sort of interim and different priests, and not Johanna Brown was there, but there was another Mrs. Brown that used to bring her dog with her to church. And I remember some cats on occasion would join us. And at some point during that period, the early 90s, 2000, I don't know actually when Tommy Tipton came.
We list him here as 99.
Well, so between 96 and 99, we had different priests. It was not a full-fledged church. It was a mission church at that point. And apparently the bishop asked Tommy to come up here, and Tommy said he would not take it unless he met with the vestry and the people here first, because being a white priest was going to change he said to them, if I come, it's not going to be a primarily black church with a few white people, it's going to be a white church with a few black people. And he wanted to make sure that the Browns and a few of the old-time, Esther Simmons was here at that point. And Roddy Brown's always announced, he got up and welcomed everybody and announced people at the beginning of the service. And they said they just wanted the legacy of this church to continue, that all their children were growing up, getting educated, and moving out of the area. And which was true. I think even Johanna Brown's son, who eventually came back, was some big wig up in D.C. for a while, and all doing very well, but not coming back to this little church here. And at some point during that time, we became a full-fledged stand-on-your-own church because we had enough members. And then it began, the building and the need for a new church. Really, we were pretty crowded most Sundays.
Were you ever a tennis coach?
Yes.
I thought so. Tell us about that. I like sports.
I coached, at Poolsville High School. Poolsville's in Maryland, outside of D.C., almost to the Potomac River, right near the C&O Canal. Smallest high school in Montgomery County, and there were 22 of them. But we were in an agricultural preserve zone, which was 5 and 25 acre zoning. So we had a limited number of kids. And I was the assistant athletic director, and when you couldn't get a coach, the assistant athletic director had to coach whatever was left. So I coached boys tennis and schlepped them from school to school because there was only, we had 5 or 6 kids. You had 4 doubles match, 2 or 3 doubles matches and 4 singles matches, and they doubled over. So I coached that. I coached there for 20 years. I started a field hockey team, and I didn't even have a full complement, and by the time I finished, I would have 40 come out for tryouts, and had to cut, had a JV team, and I coached girls softball. What else did I coach? Oh, swimming and diving. I started this. Every other school had a swim team, but of course, we were out in the country. We really didn't have any indoor pools within 10, 20 miles, so we had to practice in Frederick, Maryland, which was even in a different county at the Y there. Yeah. So all the kids would get in cars, and we'd drive to Frederick, and we'd practice. So I started that swim team, and apparently the last couple of years, they've won the states. So it has continued on, and the school's growing. They brought more programs in and so forth. So, and the town's growing, too. They needed a new sewer and water plant. See, when I moved there, first of all, we had to wait for somebody to die to have a house come available because they couldn't build because they had septic tanks and cesspools. So now they have a sewer and water plant, and they have new developments. So the school's growing a lot.
So, were you an athlete in college? Did you play?
Yeah, I was the president of the Women's Athletic Association, and I'm in their Hall of Fame.
Right.
So.
And which school was this?
Cedar Crest College, a small school in Allentown, Pennsylvania. All girls, surrounded by Lehigh, Lafayette, and Muhlenberg, which at the time, in the 50s and 60s, was all male. So it was very, it wasn't out in the woods like a few of the others, like Radcliffe and Holyoke and all.
You got plenty of attention.
Had plenty of help moving in, and plenty of panty raids from fraternities and whatnot.
Was Cedar Crest, is it denominational?
It's a United Church of Christ, which was evangelical reformed before. Yeah, I had to take Old Testament and New Testament, and, and I was in the choir there. We toured Europe one summer. We did a passion play in a basilica in Maastricht, the Netherlands, down by the Maas River. It was a little taunting. We had to get a permission from the Pope to be on the altar area. In 1962, things were a little different in the Catholic Church than they are now. Yeah. And there was a whole order of nuns and a whole order of monks in the audience, and then the townspeople. So we did that, and our choir director was a Rotarian, so we started out in Copenhagen singing for the Copenhagen Rotary for a meal. We sang for our supper, which is a bad thing to do because most of them fed you first, and then everybody was flat. Because when you eat and try and sing, it's not good. But anyway, and then the impetus of this show was an Eisteddfod, which is a adjudicated music festival. It was in Wales, in Llangollen, Wales. They have a lot of consonants in Wales.
Yes, they do.
And we stayed with families there, and my father was very excited because we actually made the AP, the Philadelphia Inquirer, because we had won, I think we won a first in folk singing and a third in women's voices. And we were one of the few women's choirs from the United States. There were people from all countries invited. But that was a really interesting experience. We started in Copenhagen and went down through Germany and the Netherlands and did the Passion Play in Maastricht. Our drama director at Cedar Crest was Dutch. She came from Maastricht. So that's where that connection came from. And then we went through the countryside of France, which I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy Paris much. In those days, there was the big Algerian business, so every street corner in Paris had a gendarme with machine guns. It wasn't a real... I mean, we went to Notre Dame, we went to the opera, we did the tourist things, but it wasn't Paris wasn't very welcoming at that point. And then we went across to London and then into Wales, and we actually rehearsed at Aberystwyth, which is where the Prince of Wales does his training. So, and watching the sun rise on the wrong side of the world, so to speak, was interesting. So it was, and I was the business manager of the choir, so I had a lot of responsibility because some of these kids just didn't. I had to collect all the passports and eventually, so they just weren't real responsible. And
so I see you were...
There was still a lot of war damage, which surprised us, because we're talking about 20 years after World War II, and the cathedral at Cologne was still a shell, and we also went to the little church where Brahms wrote a lot of his madrigals, and we had one gal with perfect pitch, so we would just start to sing, and the other tourists would be like, whoo, you know. So it was a unique tour. It wasn't your normal touristy European tour.
So your passion for travel and international experience started when you were a teenager?
Well, probably before that, because at 8 years old, I took a DC-3 from Phoenix to Philadelphia, 11 hours and 12 stops. It was, my uncle was shipped to Phoenix, or to Tucson, really, because of health reasons, and we drove his 1940 Ford out there with canvas water bags, no motels, little cabins along the way, no interstate highways, 1947, 48. It was...
Route 66?
Well, that was there, yeah. I saw the Grand Canyon, but a DC-3, no pressurized cabin. In fact, I passed out, apparently, on the way over the Rockies. I was 6 or 7, I think. But that was an interesting plane ride. We'd have to go down, you'd get out on the tarmac, and they'd fill up the airplane with fuel, and you'd get back on, and you'd fly a little bit further, and you'd go down again. My grandmother, however...
From Mexico.
Yeah. My grandmother, however, said when she went up, she was staying up, so she took the Greyhound bus back. So... She was not going to go up in that airplane.
Was Cedar Crest integrated?
Yeah. Yes, we had. Also, I joined SNCC, when I was at Cedar Crest.
Tell
Stokely
us about that.
Carmichael came to our campus.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was pre the marches, but it was the beginning of the civil rights movement, early 60s. Well, 59, 60, 61. And I didn't do a whole lot as far as marching. And I wasn't an education major, but my feeling was we need to educate people. I guess the marches were necessary, but it wasn't my bag, so to speak. Now, I did do a march at school because we wanted to wear rollers in our hair to class, and we protested that. That was my big march for curlers in your hair, for Pete's sake. And
Did y'all win that one?
And I don't even wear them. Well, you know, look at this head of hair. I don't wear curlers, but it was something to march for. I don't know whether we won it or not. I know that I was one of the first resident students in a dorm, because they always had house mothers in those days. Some old woman with a bunch of keys that kept you in shape. But they had an experiment with 23 freshmen. They took a building and turned it into a dorm for freshmen. And the dean of women, after having to deal with me for 3 years, I was chosen to be one of the residents. And the other gal, Ann Williamson, was president of the YMCA on campus, or the YWCA, or whatever it was, and she said to us in her office, "Now, Ann, I know you know all the rules." And then she looked at me and she said, "And I know you've broken them all, and you'll know when it's going to happen." So I had an apartment for one semester, and she was upstairs, and then we switched. So that's, I didn't go too far over the line, but I pushed the line quite a bit.
So you were pretty early accustomed to having leadership positions and handling
Yeah, I
money
was
and
president of the Women's Athletic Association, and I would,
keep track of the passports for the other
yeah,
people.
yeah. That I could have opened a travel agency after that trip. Our director came to me in our first hotel, and he said, "I left all my music in the cab." He asked me, 20 years old, what should I do? And I'm saying, well, go to the desk and call the cab company. I mean, he was a musician. Their house was full of pianos and violins, and the kids were that way. And I remember his wife was our accompanist. She wasn't at school, but she on this trip, and he always went out. We always started each concert with the national anthem of the country we were in, and ended with our national anthem. And he walked out to introduce us, and she was standing next to me. She said, "Oh, Wilbur has the wrong pants on with that suit. He doesn't have his suit on. He has two different." And I said, "Well, whatever," because sometimes he would come and you could see his pajamas under his slacks at practice at school. And one time he left his car running. He ran in and got his mail, and it was out of gas after rehearsal. But he was the typical college professor. And she walked out, and I looked at her, and she had two different shoes on. So I thought, well,
she's no better off.
here we go. Yeah.
Now, we may need to sort of end things here. It may go into the other.
Also, the Cuban Missile Crisis was during my tenure in school.
So I am rolling, so you may begin now.
Tell us about your early job teaching in Philadelphia.
Well, I was not an education major. I was a history poli-sci major and psychology. I had a double major. And I applied to Temple University School of Psychology, but I did not I got in, but not a full scholarship. And Temple had a program for college graduates that had subject area but no teaching. So I thought, I was ready to get out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
I was an only child, very much hovered over by my mother, and which was probably part of my rebellious attitude. So I applied, got in, and that first summer, and the reason they were doing this basically was because they needed teachers in the inner city schools.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to agree to teach for 2 years. Never did any student teaching. We did 8 graduate credits that summer, and then we were given a classroom. I had 40-some kids in a room with 30-some chairs.
Mm-hmm.
They were sitting on windowsills and everything, and they brought their lunches and put them on the heater so it smelled like fried chicken all morning. And in those days, we had a core curriculum where you had each class. I only had 2 classes, and you had a core class that was called the core curriculum, where you had them for 3 periods. I think we had English, history, and something else. And then in the afternoon you had another group, another grade level. But on Mondays, well, every morning you said a Pledge of Allegiance, you said the Lord's Prayer, and you read the Bible. Now this is Philadelphia Public Schools. I'm sure it's much different now. It was, if you know anything about the geography of Philadelphia, it was West Philadelphia. That it was, the school was just off of Broad Street. Broad Street goes north and south, and Market goes east and west, and divides the city. And in the middle is City Hall with William Penn on top. Mm-hmm. And our section was that northwest corner, and it was predominantly black. I was one of the few white teachers, and I had one white child the whole time I was there, and I suspended him the first day because he was very non-compliant. I had 17-year-olds that were in the 8th grade, 9th grade. Mm-hmm. It was Gillespie Junior High, and we were right next to Simon Gretz Senior High. There were no guns in those days. There were still there were gangs, but they were mainly, the fights were knife fights. Mm-hmm. And I had a warlord in my class, my 8th grade class, that was, his name was Walter, I forget his last name. And he lit up a cigarette, I'd say the 3rd day of class, so I picked up, we had phones, and he was suspended. And I was able to catch him before he came back into class one morning, and I pulled him into a room. I said, okay, this is the deal. I looked at your record. If I suspend you one more time, you're going back into juvie, which is the juvenile detention center. Mm-hmm. I said, or you and I can work together. I said, if I were a kid, I would listen to you more than I would listen to me, because if they don't listen to you, they're going to have to run the gamut. Now, do you know what running the gamut is? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's, bottles, they have to run through. So I said, we can either work together and get through this year, or I can pick up the phone when you walk in the door today and you're gone. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter to me. So we agreed that he would work with me. And at the end of the conversation, I was engaged at the time. He said, is that diamond real? And I thought, oh, Lord. I said, yeah, it's real. I hope. Anyway, we got through that year very well. I actually took this whole class to Independence on a field trip. Mm-hmm. Now, they lived over top of the subway and the L, but they'd never been on it. So we took the subway to Philadelphia. Philadelphia school system had master teachers at Independence Hall, at Carpenter's Hall, at all the major attractions, and they taught the class. I walked in the front of that line and Walter walked in the back, and I didn't lose a kid or have one discipline problem because he and I were on the same side at that point. But I did a lot of counseling with these kids from the ghettos about their problems with their black teachers, because the black teachers resented these kids. The black teachers were engineers' wives, doctors' wives, educated, upper-class black, as the kids called them, uppity women and men. And they resented these kids, and these kids resented them. It was, you know, so I did a lot of, in my homeroom, a lot of counseling on how to get along and how to ignore things. And interesting, when I announced I was pregnant with my first child and that I wouldn't be back until the following September, this was like after Christmas, and probably Steve was born in April, so it was probably March. I looked at, money started changing hands. Apparently they were taking book on whether I was pregnant or not. And so that was one incident. And then I had one of the bigger girls who was probably 17. Miss H, she said, piece of cake, I have 2 kids at home. She'd been thrown out of a parochial school for punching a nun in the face. So I felt lucky that I got along with her and she was on my side as far as childbirth was concerned. So there were some interesting things. And then I took them to Valley Forge one time, and this was probably another year. I saw all this beautiful green grass and these, you know, you have to go through some suburban developments to get into the Valley Forge Park. And because that was part of the history. Where's the corner store? I said, well, really, you have to get in. Oh, I wouldn't want to live here. You know, you can't get to the corner store. You can't walk. You know, it was a whole. It was almost like a whole different lifetime. But I made it. A lot of the gals and guys that entered this program couldn't handle it. They were too, I guess, too intellectual or something. I mean, I was willing to, they issued your books, and these kids couldn't read. So I taught with pictures, but that frustrated a lot of these brighter students, I guess they were, I don't know, or more intellectual students. But I figured, well, if I can teach them to keep a notebook, and if I can teach them something through the pictures and through talking, because they all could talk, I figured I was getting somewhere anyway. So, but there wasn't a lot of real book learning going on, let's put it that way.
Were you teaching them something else?
I think there was a lot of life learning going on, and I think they did absorb. Now, I had one class that they grouped them according to ability. So I had one class that was really on the ball, one of my years. That was one of the brightest classes. And that was, we did a lot that year, but it was interesting. It was sort of like another life. When I look back on it now, because I was, 21, 22, and now I'm 80, almost 81.
This is, where did this liberalism toward race come from? Is that from your family, or?
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to school with black children from an early age. I mean, I lived in Philadelphia. I had Jews and blacks and all kinds of people in my home. My father had a business in the city of Philadelphia. He was German. They were German. They were discriminated against during the war. They weren't put in camps like some of Jill had a friend who's now my friend, and she and her husband were actually interred because they grew up in California. 5th generation's Japanese, but interred. During the war. Now, my family wasn't interred. but their businesses went under. My father family was clockmakers.
Mm.
And so and plus the fact you couldn't get parts from Germany, number one. Number two, things were going to electricity in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So there were two brothers, Frederick and Louis, and my grandfather was Louis. Frederick's son had the retail store. Well, he could very easily bring in electric clocks and watches and all kinds of things. My father had the factory with the cabinet makers and the clock makers. And it wasn't going anywhere, so he went to his father's savings club society and started a savings and loan. He'd been to Temple University, he'd hitchhiked to California and back. He'd had a lot of experience too. But he started a savings and loan in the city. And they were all the directors of the savings and loan. He took their money and invested it, and it was called a building loan in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But it's your savings and loan, basically mortgages and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And
Local community finance.
yeah, but he started that. It was right on Broad Street across from Fairmount Park, and I just was a city girl. I mean, we had all kinds of people in our home, and we were, even though we lived in a fairly German community, my other family was all German also, but I don't know, I had a lot of different friends, Jewish, black. I don't think Philadelphia was made up of a lot of different ethnic groups, and I don't think we sort of crossed too many lines, like into Chinatown or into maybe South Philly. I knew South Philly, especially for the steak and cheese, but Italians, I don't know. It was just a city, and there was just a lot of different people in that city that I grew up with. So I didn't have any. It wasn't a very closed community. I guess that's where it came from. I don't know. I've always had all kinds of friends.
Right.
I don't think I was particularly liberal, but I like things to be right. I like, everybody to be fair to one another and honest to one another. But I'm not sure I was particularly liberal, but I guess I was.
Well,
As any other, I think a lot of kids go through that in college too. I think socially I'm liberal, and financially and business-wise I'm conservative. I think I'm a dual personality.
Now your family is multicultural, isn't it?
Yeah, my daughter married a black. Well, he's actually a quarter American Indian. His Big Ma, his grandmother, is 100% Indian from a tribe in Virginia. So that my granddaughters are 1/8 American Indian and could have gone to Dartmouth for free if they would have pursued that, but they didn't. One went to Vanderbilt and one went to Georgia, but they're it's nice family. We in fact, Jared's black. He actually had more his family had more in common with our family than most of the white guys she dated. So it was funny. It's interesting. But I have two mixed granddaughters.
I've seen them.
Yeah. They came here a lot as little girls. They started coming at 2 and 4. I would have them every summer, most of the summer. and so they know the church and very active in their church in Atlanta, which is a pretty liberal church. It's in Decatur. It's Epiphany, and they are active. Well, they were active, and the parents still are. So that's just one child.
Tell us about the other child.
Well, I have two more. One's up in New Bern. He teaches school. He's been at New Bern High School since the early 90s. He went to, he's a marine biology teacher, and they attended, they're not going right now to Christ Episcopal because they have had a falling out with Reverend Paul. He didn't come to see Heather's dad when he was dying, but he was in the hospital. I mean, it was just unfortunate. But one boy was baptized here. Tommy baptized him. The other one's baptized at Christ. And then Sarah married a Irish Catholic boy, but he's now become an Episcopalian, and they're up in Syracuse. They were down at Mount Pleasant. I think it was Christ Episcopal on the left-hand side, but they're part of the group that left. But they hadn't left at the time they belonged. Now they're up in Syracuse in Fayetteville, and they're an Episcopal church there, and their priest who was our former bishop that was the interim bishop that came from up there?
Skip.
Adams. Renee was Skip Adams' administrative assistant, so she's a real nice gal. I listen to her. She does a homily on YouTube during this pandemic, and she has continued to do it for those that don't feel comfortable coming back. I think New York's a little more closed than we are, and they are indoors a lot, and that's apparently one of the things that causes this pandemic to increase. So, and some of the older people. So she still does the homily, which is interesting to hear. And sometimes I listen to Susie's priest to hear our homily or our sermon, Epiphany sermon, and Fayetteville sermon on the same gospel from three different priests. It's very interesting to listen to the take on all of these. So that's kind of so. Steve's a teacher. He coaches football, swimming, lacrosse, and my daughter in Atlanta is also a swim coach. She runs swimming for all of Gwinnett County. And Sarah turned out to be a nurse. She was got her degree from Appalachian and then went to USC for public health. And when she was working at MUSC, decided she could do everything but administer medicine. So she went to nursing school at 30 or however old she was, and then so she's an RN, and she just substitutes as a school nurse because she was injured. But they're up in Syracuse. The kids are now down in Florida at school, and glad of it. But I have a feeling they may be moving back down here one of these days soon.
Tell us about coming here to church.
Well, it's just very welcoming, and it's funny when I go back to St. Peter's or if I go up to Fayetteville, the old stone churches, I feel very closed in.
The Gothic Rock House.
It's just so open and light and bright, and even going to church with Pixie up in Maine, it just felt very closed in to me. I just love it, and I don't know, I was always an advocate, even up in the vestry up in Maryland, of outreach. Buildings to me aren't the deal. Yeah, you have to have them, and they're necessary. But to me, outreach, and that's really the big draw here, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The medical clinic, the food pantry, the St. Elizabeth's Place.
Was Cathcart Smith still here?
I think he was still alive,
Mm-hmm.
and I may have met him once.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was definitely the outreach and the
The clinic was still right here, right? Right
yeah,
there.
it was the old building, and
Mhm.
we had a parish hall and a swimming pool. This was the only swimming pool in Georgetown County.
Right.
And after Bible school, we would have our picnic, and we'd have swimming over there.
Mm-hmm.
Because we'd have to get a lifeguard from, I think the Y was not built yet down in Georgetown, but there was a Y association. And there was a parish hall and the swimming pool over there where the medical clinic is now. It was just, and I started a Sunday school because I feel like that's the future. That's the one part of this church that I think we need to work on is youth. I really, because that's going to be the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we do loads of things and we have loads of ministries, but I really think, and it's a predicament because of the way they do things with sports and everything now,
Mm-hmm.
having them on Sundays. You didn't used to be able to do that. That's not good English, but you didn't used to be able to do that.
Right.
Nothing started till, even in Montgomery County, Maryland, you couldn't buy liquor till afternoon. And when I first moved here, I don't think we could buy it at all on Sundays. I'm not sure, but
Well, you could illegally buy it, but not.
well, not yeah. Well, I usually
blue
get,
laws,
I usually get my booze legally.
That's
That's one thing I do legally, and I don't manufacture any either. So I've never started a still.
What about transporting it across state lines?
That I have done. That I have done. I've even transported it from country to country. I took my, one of my assistant coaches was mortified. I took my, every spring break I would go to, well, not every spring break, but every third spring break I'd take my hockey team to Barbados to play. I would never take a bunch of kids on spring break without some. And we would have practice every morning. We'd have games in the evening, but we also did a lot of cultural things. But I would bring home, if we would go to, say, a rum factory or whatever, booze happened to be the booze of the day, and I would give each kid a bottle. Well, she was absolutely mortified, but she had a fit that I would even think about that. But, well, too bad. They know I'm a human. I lived in the community. There are pluses and minuses for that happening, but living in the community where you teach. But they knew me. They knew my kids. They knew, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But this church is just open, welcoming, and it was from the very beginning, even when it was over in the chapel. I mean, I love the little chapel. I wish we'd open it back up and get it back into with the pews and the kneelers and the, because I love the little services over there. They're so intimate.
Mm-hmm.
Even though this is so much more open. But even when Will first came, weren't we over there? Some? Weren't we over there?
We did some.
We did
Lenten
Easter
services
over there, I think. We did. Because I think when he passed out, the Easter Sunday he hit the deck, I think we were in the chapel. It was the early morning service in the chapel.
We did do some service, and we would do, not exactly Sunday, sort of coffee with clergy, but we would do things over there.
Yeah.
Make use of the building.
And the healing service was always over there.
Mm-hmm.
But, once it was redone, when Donnie Nichols redid it and new roof and everything, that, you know, it's really, I'd like to see it. I hate it all piled up with stuff.
Right.
Mhm. I think that may be fixed in the fullness of time.
I hope.
We get this other building built and
Yeah.
we can move things around.
Yeah.
But I think we need to get it back open again, even if it's just for people to go in and pray during the day.
Well, that is our history.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And many of the surviving black parishioners miss the chapel, and miss the swimming pool, and
Yeah.
miss a number of things that used to. We
Yeah.
still do outreach, but they think we used to do more outreach.
Well, they had the camp here and they had the school here. I wasn't here then, but the remnants of it was still here.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think what Renee Ford's doing is
Mm-hmm.
good with that program where we're taking the food to people so that they don't necessarily have to come here. And I was surprised to hear Marcia say that there are homeless students living behind St. James High School. I had no clue. I mean, I know they're homeless people around here, but wow, that's
Yeah. That we think of that as being the most progressive school in the area, and it wins all the awards, and it's awfully nice. I was at a basketball game and I met some Myrtle Beach High School teachers, and they were telling me how many homeless kids they had, and that this was 10 years ago, and I was
yeah.
really,
Well,
really
I know
astounded.
there have always been homeless kids, but I always thought they lived in cars with their parents or
Mhm.
something like that. I never realized that just the kids are living there. I'd like to find out more
Yeah,
about
she
that.
She can tell you more.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to Marcia about
I
that.
think it's motel to motel, but
Hmm.
they're not living in cars, but they have no actual place to be.
Yeah. Well, I know that that's a problem, but
Mhm.
and I know it's here as well as anywhere else
Mhm.
in the world, really. But I didn't realize
Well, the
if they're students on their own. That surprised me
yeah, that's
versus families.
these teachers I met. I sat with them during a game. There were 4 of them. They were sort of the mommies
Hmm.
to kids, both races, not just black kids.
Oh yeah. Oh, and there's I'm sure as many white homeless kids as black. Absolutely. In fact, I think there may be more white homeless because I think the culture of the black community takes care of. They
Reach out
care
to
of each other, and they might not be much, but they provide. That's been my experience. That they're very family oriented, even if it's just mama. There's a big family orientation, and community orientation. Like with Dot's family, Dot Bond's family, like the Great Street over there, and the 2 sisters that live there in that whole compound, and where Johanna lives, it's more or less a compound, and they help one another and take care of one another, and I'm not sure a lot of the white poor do the same thing. I may be wrong, but that's just my perception. But I'd be interested in that.
Ms. Dot brought me into the church here.
Really?
And she,
Where did you meet her?
here, Rita had met her.
Oh,
and then
okay.
Rita introduced me to her.
Okay.
I spent, this is about you, not me, but I was finishing my career teaching in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rita was working with the Head Start, not Head Start, but a program, the GED program here.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah. Well, I was just looking for an Episcopal church, and
Right.
I never did go to Prince George, but I did All Saints, and I did Resurrection, and I did one other. I'm not sure Christ the King was around then.
I think
But anyway, I wasn't that happy with, just trying. And when I came here, it was just
Right.
like I said, almost a no-brainer. And when my daughter said to me, well, I think this church needs you more than you need it, I said, okay, good, I can be of use to somebody somewhere.
Now, were you in the Episcopal Church women?
Well, I got turned off up in Maryland
Uh-huh.
because it seemed to be a rather elite society of the church. And the first meeting, I went to a meeting and then I had one at my house. And it was an old town, and we had to, like I said, we had to wait for somebody to die to move in.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about, well, when I lived in this house, yada, 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 and when I lived in this house, well, you know, and I thought, it wasn't my cup of tea up there. So I really hadn't joined down here. I support, and I'm hoping to go on Thursday, but, and I support all they do, but my interest was more in getting the Sunday school going, which I did for a number of years. It was more like a one-room schoolhouse type thing.
Well, that'd be appropriate, wouldn't it?
But we did it, and we did it upstairs. I had Sheldon Rutherford. I had Nate. Nate came when they were little guys, and we would have one teacher and a helper, and we had a little altar up there, and we did that thing where you played with the toy. That wasn't my cup of tea, but we did it with the, what was that
Godly
called?
play.
Yeah, godly play. We did that. You know, I did it, but you know, and the other teachers seemed to like it, so whatever. And
You were, when did you join St. Stephen's ministry?
we started Stephen's ministry in 2008, and it was who did the seed money for that? She lives out on Waverly Road, and her husband continued to go to All Saints. She comes back every now and then. Oh, what was her name? She put the seed money in, and we met with the assistant rector at the Presbyterian Church who had a Stephen ministry program, and Beth Chaplin and I, Mary Brown's daughter, who has since moved back to Atlanta. Beth and I went to the first training. It was 2008, I believe.
And you remain active in it?
Yeah, I sort of do most of the training. However, being away, Reverend Sandy sort of picked it up a little bit in my absence, and she's doing a good job, and she ran the whole program down in Jacksonville, so Denise is really pleased with her. But John and Denise and I are the three leaders, and Sandy's helping their team teaching, because I started off with Denise, and I'll probably sub a couple times when different people can't make it, but I've taught at least 5 or 6 training classes. One we did with Shepherd of the Sea, where we had 20-some people, and but some we have 3, some we have 8, 9, and then of course there's a supervision meeting, which is really part of it, to keep the Stephen ministers, to help them. It's to help them deal with the different situations they're coming in contact with, very anonymously. It's all very names are never mentioned. It's very confidential. In fact, sometimes I don't even know who their care receivers are. Only Will would know, or maybe Ryan. I run training programs there. We've taken them to funeral homes, because lots of times they're dealing with spouses of people that are dying, that need the Stephen minister to help them get through it. And by knowing what the funeral, we went to Goldfinch and Burroughs 2 different times, knowing what to expect and what they would provide and how to help people plan things out. We've gone to, when we had Tidelands Hospice, we've had the Alzheimer's gal, the head of the Alzheimer's Association, come twice. Because lots of times they're not necessarily dealing with an Alzheimer's patient, but they're dealing with the caregiver of an Alzheimer's patient. So I do the I'm into the training end of it versus the actual caregiving end of it. Not that I couldn't do that, but and we've had a lot of people over the years pass through.
You know, since this was a mission for a long time, and after Father Forsyth passed, you didn't always have a full assigned priest.
No.
You had a supply priest.
Right.
So the community, the church community, had to do a lot of the ministry.
Right.
I think Roddy and Colbert took turns
Right.
leading services. As
Sometimes,
laborers.
yeah.
And they got real used to doing things that we think of priests doing.
Well, yeah, but they had to because it was a mission church. And it wasn't still a mission church until Tommy came. And I think even when he came, it was a mission church for a while. We had to, you had to meet certain criteria to become
That's right.
a full-fledged parish. And I'm not sure, I never got into the politics of that. I'm not sure quite what it was.
We got parish status in 2001. And
Yeah, see, and Tommy had been here a couple of years. And I believe I was on the vestry then. I was on the vestry at some point. Twice. I've served 2 terms. I was on the vestry up in Maryland. My husband was on. Jill was on. Jill's husband was on. I think Jill and John were on down here too. At different times.
You saw the Bishop Lawrence coming in, and you saw the schism or whatever you want to call it, where for a while the diocese wasn't even really
functioning.
Functioning. You saw that.
I actually, as a priest, I really like Bishop Lawrence. The visit that he came, he was spot on. But
I liked Robinson Jeffers, and he could quote entire long sections of Robinson Jeffers.
Yeah.
I can't quote any of it, but I loved
it. But the politics, the preaching was good.
Right.
He just was on the wrong side of the politics, in my opinion.
Oh, he was charismatic.
Well,
May have been too charismatic.
You could be charismatic and still be Episcopalian.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I would say he fooled me. I met him over here. We had a meeting in the.
Yeah, I mean, he came, he did his visit, and I was impressed with him.
I was charmed. And,
nice man, and I think,
I don't believe.
I think he came. Looking back, I think he came under false pretenses.
As I said, I don't think he was straight up and down with us.
I think because I think a lot of this was fermenting. I think.
Well, they signed quit rents very early.
The Anglican movement that All Saints went through with Murphy had already started, but this was different. This wasn't quite that. But I, in reading what he said and listening to what he said, I think he led us astray a bit. That's my opinion. I'm not real good at reading people. I mean, what you see is what you get with me, and I'm assuming it's the same with you. And my husband was better at figuring people out, and so is one of my kids, but the rest of us just take what's there for what it is, So.
Do you
But-
think we do as much outreach as we used to?
I don't think we reach the youth that we used to reach.
Mhm.
When we had the pool here and they had the camp here and we had Bible school here, I think we did a lot more with younger people
Mhm.
and younger families. That's where I think we're missing.
Well, it suggests institutional death if we don't get kids involved.
Well, yeah, and I think that the different camp programs and Bible school programs and summer programs. Now I don't, you know, what other outreach. I think we do a good job with providing food and medical help to a lot of people. The other thing we did for a while, particularly when Callie was here, and I was surprised we didn't do it when Jason was here, was we had a Spanish service every week.
Yeah.
And poor old John Miller tried his best to do it in Spanish, but it was murderous. he really couldn't speak the language. Sorry. Not that I could, but yeah, we had that. We had a Spanish, and there's a group we need to reach, in my opinion, too.
Well, they're here.
Mhm.
They're here, and they need a place to work.
And we had a big, a fairly good size service on. It was during the week, but we had a Hispanic service, and Callie started it, and then. But Jason, we never had it. I would have thought, because Jason is so attuned to the Hispanic and the Dominican Republic and all that, I don't know why. Maybe it was Will's choice. I don't know. But I think that's something we could do, and that was something the chapel was used for. Was the Hispanic service. I'd like to see that happen again. That and the youth, I think, are places where we could, if you have it, they'll come. Same with the Sunday school or Bible school or anything else. I definitely think.
We used to have a vacation Bible school,
Yep, I ran that a couple of years too.
and that was kids,
Yeah.
and not just Episcopal kids, but just kids.
No, all kinds of, everybody. In fact, what happens is you don't have it the same week as the Lutheran church or the Methodist church or the Presbyterian church, and then the kids make the rounds of all the different Bible schools. It gives them activities in the summer. It doesn't cost them anything. And you do some outreach to the community. So, yeah, we did that a number of years. The Sunday school and the outreach, and I don't know, it just kind of fizzled. Nobody took over. I did what I could and got it going, and then things change and priorities change. But I think, we had Vacation Bible School here. We had a good time.